Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 228. Most people in this world go to their grave working a job they hated their whole life. So if you're able to make a living doing what you love, you won. Spike Lee.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's episode is brought to you by Blackbox. Blackbox is a new platform and community that is all about financial freedom for filmmakers like you. If you join Blackbox, you will be transformed from being a worker to being a maker of your own content. And you'll be making steady passive income from the global market. Blackbox currently allows you to upload your stock footage once, get it to many global agencies, and then allows you to share that passive income stream with your collaborators. Whether you want to submit old footage that's been sitting around in your hard drives or create brand new content, Blackbox is for you. It's really quite revolutionary. With Blackbox, filmmakers can concentrate on making great content while Blackbox takes care of all the business BS. Just visit www.blackbox.global to find out more. Today's show is also sponsored by Studio Unknown. Studio Unknown is a crack team of audio post professionals known for quality sound on any indie budget. Whether you need a lush surround sound mix or a quick festival submission pass, Studio Unknown can help you with all of your post-sound needs, from sound design and mix to Foley, ADR, and even a custom score. Contact Studio Unknown and mention the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, and you'll get 50% off one day of ADR or 10% off your complete post-sound package. Just go to studiounknown.com. So today, guys, on the show, we're going to talk about the magical and mythical and very misunderstood world of residuals and what filmmakers working with unions have to do in regards to paying residuals back to actors, to directors, to writers, as well as paying back their investors, and how you do all of that and how you structure all of that. Now, we're going to get into the weeds a little bit today with today's guest, David Zannoni of Fintage House. And we're going to really get into the weeds on how you manage rights of your movie, how you're able to get investors paid back properly, how to protect yourself as an independent filmmaker. It's really some amazing stuff. And I met him at AFM this year, and we hit it off. And I said, you have to be on the show. Filmmakers just don't understand this and it's just a completely, covert world that I had never even heard of. And I'd been in the business for over 20 odd years. So I know a lot of you guys haven't heard about what he does and tricks to kind of protect yourself on working with investors, working with unions, and so on. So without any further ado, here is my conversation with David Zannoni. I'd like to welcome to the show David Zannoni. How are you doing, brother?
Doing very well, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I bumped into you at AFM, and we have our mutual friend, RB. From Stage 32 that connected us. And once I started talking to you, I was fascinated by what you do. And I think you could be of a service to many filmmakers because it's just something so mysterious that I really never thought about. So before we get into what you actually do, how did you even get into the business? And why are you in another business instead of this crazy one?
That's a very good question, Alex. First of all, I'm from Holland, so my story about getting into the film business is probably different from many other people, especially in the US. Mm-hmm. So I was, two of my passions are basically traveling and languages. Mm-hmm. And when I was in my mids and 20s, which is about 10 years ago or so, mm-hmm. I just returned from living and traveling and working abroad, Italy and Mexico, and I was basically in the Netherlands, just looking for an opportunity to travel and to speak my languages and to do international business. Mm-hmm. So at some point, I run into this small company in Leiden, small town near Amsterdam, mm-hmm. Which was in the film business, doing everything basically internationally, working obviously with we produce in Hollywood, but also people in Spain and Latin America. So I was impressed. I was fascinated by it. I didn't know anything about the film business other than that I like watching films, but I didn't know anything about how the independent business worked at all. And I applied, and they hired me. And that's when I started my journey in this crazy business, Alex.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The film industry is a very seductive siren.
It is, and I have to say, I mean, in the beginning, I seriously I didn't know what I was doing, because maybe this is different from many of your other speakers. With the business I'm in, the side of business, collection account management is. It's not a creative side at all. It's really the business side. So I had to start working on collection account management agreements with independent producers and multi-party agreements. So I had to learn everything from scratch. And if you're from a small country outside Los Angeles, but even outside other, let's say, international financial centers or local film hubs like London, for example, but even Madrid or Paris, it's very hard. So there's no comparison. There's a Dutch film industry, but it's generally local and it's small, and it's not that, let's say, that obvious that you run it. It's not like in Los Angeles, wherever you are, that you meet people who are one way or the other involved in the film business, right? Whether they are producers or people working at Starbucks and want to be writers. It doesn't happen in Holland. It doesn't happen in little tiny Leiden. That's
got you.
So that's how I get it.
So tell me what you're doing today exactly.
Yeah, so my focus on behalf of Fintage House is on collection account management for independent film and television productions.
Okay.
So, and that's like I said, completely on the business and legal side. So how does it work? Independent production, independently produced, financed, and distributed. With all the risks on the collection and allocation of revenues, because generally a film or television series, an independent project, is sold to independent distributors worldwide, and those distributors pay minimum guarantees, basically licenses to or royalties to license the films locally. They pay them in principle to the production, would be the LLC for a US production, and from there the production company has the commitment, obligation to pay all those beneficiaries, all those people who have been involved in the film and have a financial interest in the film. So whether that's repaying of investors, financiers, or the sales agent who sells the film internationally, or talent, right? Whether that's deferred producer fees, for example, or box office bonuses. In principle, the production company has all those commitments, and basically, what we do, we open collection accounts, single account per film, and the distributors, rather than paying directly to the LLC, they pay to this collection account, which is a single purpose account. It's only set up for that specific film, and its only purpose is to receive the revenues from the film, international revenues, and to distribute them amongst the beneficiaries of the film.
Investors,
financiers, the guilds, very important to mention. So the only thing we actually do is precisely that. We receive those revenues for the film, and we allocate and distribute those revenues amongst the beneficiaries, and we do it pursuant to a collection account management agreement, single standalone agreement we entered into with the production company and the parties with the main financial interest in the film. And the position we take on as a collection account manager is completely neutral. So the only job it has is to receive and allocate those revenues completely, literally in accordance with the collection agreement. And by doing this, it basically provides a guarantee to the beneficiaries of the film.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Not that distributors pay for the film, but once there are revenues generated and they're properly paid by the distributors of the film, the local distributors, to the collection account, we basically guarantee that those monies are paid in accordance with the recoupment schedule, the conditions, the terms and conditions we agreed in the collection account management agreement. That's basically the whole essence of the service.
So you're basically a babysitter for the money coming in a lot of ways. You're like, look, I'm the grown up. The money's going to come to me, and then I'm going to give it out to everybody. We're not emotional about it. We're not. There's nothing creative here. We are strictly a service, and we all. You basically just. In many ways, you're like the babysitter in a good way.
Alex, I think that's the best summary, the best definition I've ever heard about it. But it's certainly true. I mean, and it's precisely that. So all those, everybody who's worked on a film project, has produced a film, there are generally so many people involved in an independent film project, and everybody has his or her interest in the film. Right. So these parties need a neutral third party, basically, to take care of something which is extremely important to everybody, but nobody really has to focus on from the beginning, right? We always say the producer focuses on producing. The whole focus is on getting films made. Right. The sales agency is focused on selling. The financier investor wants to brings in money in the film and wants to recoup investment. And usually this is not centralized. So through a collection account manager, you basically centralize the whole business side of receiving and allocating revenues. And indeed, there's nothing creative about it. It's completely just completely robotic in a way, right? That the only thing we do is the agreement. So there's no argument possible. It's impossible. It would be impossible to say, this is what we agreed in the amendment or in the agreement. For example, there's a $100,000 producer fee payable to party X, and the party wants to renegotiate, or is basically instructing the collection account manager to pay differently. There's just no way. We only strictly follow the agreement.
Got it. So, David, what is the biggest mistake you see filmmakers make with payment structures for investors? Because I know a lot of filmmakers have no idea of what should be a proper, payment structure. What do you see?
That's a good question. The biggest mistake. I mean, I don't really think you can define it as a mistake. I think it's for every filmmaker, for a producer, making a film is a journey. Many independent producers, it may take years before a film is actually made. So it's not like that there is a certain guide, or that people have the experience to put this all together. But what I do think is that what people rather than speaking of a mistake, what people do not realize is how complicated these structures can become, and also the fact that independent film production and financing schedule is very often made of several single pieces who all independently create commitments. Right, that means that for example, that the producer has the commitment to pay maybe 4 or 5 equity investors, but at the same time. And all in order to get the film made, right? So maybe at the same time there's an agreement with an actor, with a director, to defer compensation. So that's another commitment. And there may be at the same time the obligation to pay residuals, right? If there are, if for example actors are guild members. So all these single obligations, and usually each of these obligations, it has its own deal and agreement with its own language. I think that that for filmmakers, it's not even the question of whether they make a mistake if they realize. It's just very often too much to deal with.
While you're marketing it, while you're trying to get distribution, while you're getting your next project set up, all that stuff.
Yeah, indeed. And what's also very important to mention, many of the filmmakers, independent producers, they make maybe one film each a couple of years. So it's a lot of work on one project. Whereas, for example, the sales agents who sell the film, they may do 10 or 20 or 30 films a year. Look at myself, Alex. I think we, from Fintage perspective speaking, we do about 140, 150 films a year. I think I see probably one way or another, maybe 40, 50 films a year. So you see a lot more. I mean, the involvement is a lot less in detail, but you see all the structures, you see all the parties, you see how people handle, how people deal with issues. And that's for an independent filmmaker, independent producer, is a lot more difficult. So I think that's probably what is for independent producers the biggest hurdle. And getting together the payment structure, the recoupment schedule, how we call it, which is basically a waterfall. So putting all those single commitmends in terms of allocation and disbursements of revenue, so repayment of investments, deferred producer fees, back-end participants, to put it all together in one schedule and get everybody to sign off on it. So all those parties with a financial interest in the film, that's probably the biggest challenge. Let's call it a challenge for filmmakers.
It seems like it's such a massive thing you have to deal with, and if you're not good at it or have experience doing it, it could be very unruly. And I know of many filmmakers who get called back, back payments on the DGA or the Writers Guild, or this investor didn't get the money they exactly wanted, or the back end points and all that kind of stuff. It gets really hairy really quickly. So having something like this really helps things out. Now, how would a film producer normally deal with SAG residual payments if they didn't use a service like yours?
Yeah. So basically, in a nutshell, a film producer has two options. Either if the SAG is involved, they can either pay it out of the budget, the residuals, or they can make it payable out of the revenues. Now, if the moment that residuals are payable out of the revenues, then the SAG basically enforces or they oblige the producer to enter into a collection account management agreement. If it was without a collection account, then the distributors of the film, so the moment that the sales agent on behalf of the producer starts to sell the film internationally, and all those single distributors, and maybe we're talking about 20 or 25 or 30
territories, right?
Different territories and different MGs, etc. Then those revenues would go typically first to the agent, to the sales agent. The sales agent would, in accordance with the sales agency agreement, takes its commission and expenses, forward the remainder to the LLC, the production company. And
those expenses can be a little bit pricey sometimes.
That's that's the whole issue. And
sure.
If anything, I mean, whatever ends up with the production company, the producer would then it would still need to hire always a payroll house to calculate the residuals and pay those residuals. But whether we're talking about payment of residuals, right, or repayment of an investment, or deferred producer fees, at the end of the day, the whole structure of selling the film, distributing the film, receiving those revenues through a sales agent, and from there, as independent producers, having to deal with all those single payments, and again, in accordance with all those single agreements and those single deal terms, that's probably the biggest hassle, the biggest risk. If the producers do not deal with it properly, then they have obviously a huge issue with the SAG. Without a collection account, they would have to deal with it themselves. And from experience, 9 out of 10, that's a real challenge.
Now, how do distributors generally pay out to producers? For people in the audience who don't know exactly how that works.
Sure. And firstly, you're referring to distributors, to the local distributors. You're referring to the agents, the sales agents selling the film internationally.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. I'm talking more about the distributor. If everything goes through a sales agent, there's one way. But if you just make a deal with a local distributor here in the United States, let's say, so you go with Gravitas, or you go with A24, or you go with any of these guys. Yeah. How do they normally, how do payments come out generally, and how do they get to the producer? And then please explain the sales producer aspect of it as well, a sales agent aspect as well.
Okay, so there are a couple of different deals that producers basically can make with distributors. It can be straight distribution, it can be an MG. Mm-hmm. If it's straight distribution, it completely depends on how the film basically performs locally. Mm-hmm. And when it comes from the theaters, from the exhibitors to the distributor, there's a certain mechanism, a split between distributor and exhibitor. It ends up with the distributor, and then and that's all negotiable between producers and distributors. There's a certain formula in terms of split between distributor and licensor, producer. So at the end of the day, only a small portion of the revenues end up with the producer. Now, if the distributor has expenses to recoup, which could be, P&A, distribution expenses, etc. Mm-hmm. It may well be that if the film doesn't perform properly, that there's nothing left for the producer, and the whole challenge is obviously to make sure that the distributor's accounting is proper, and that's been up to date. In the film business, a very delicate
gray area.
Let's call it a gray area. Yes. Now, if it's a minimum guarantee. It depends on what is agreed, but it's usually a couple of installments, 2 or 3, and they pay those installments to the production company.
Generally by quarter.
Yeah, indeed. And if there is a collection account in between, those monies would go through the collection account on behalf of the producer. Right. Now. And that's, let's say, domestic distribution. In international distribution, the traditional way is for producer to hire a sales agent. The sales agent has its own infrastructure, its relationships, contacts with local distributors, and it basically, on behalf of the producer, sells the rights to local distributors. And it's very rare to see straight distribution deals, so it's almost always minimum guarantees, and there it's the same thing. It's a couple of installments the distributor basically pays, and again, it could be 2 or 3 or 4 installments. And those revenues would, without a collection account, first go to the sales agent, from the sales agent to the production company. With a collection account, the distributors locally, so whether that's in Germany or Japan or Mexico, they pay directly to the collection account, and from the collection account we actually we pay the sales agent. So by doing this, you basically take control away from the sales agent, at least control over the revenues, and
exactly what's coming in.
You know exactly what's coming in. So basically what a collection account manager typically does for every single payment that is received in the collection account, it sends a payment notification to all parties involved, and it issues statements every month or every quarter, depends what's being negotiated between the parties, and those statements contain gross receipts report, so basically the monies received in the account with a breakdown per territory and per distributor, and it basically shows the deal, the commercial deal negotiated by the sales agent. So, for example, whatever, $50,000 MG for Mexico, and $25,000 already paid, so the $25,000 pending. So everybody involved in the film basically is aware of the revenues received and still pending, and at the same time, the collection account manager pays the sales agent its commission expenses, and the expenses usually there's a cap negotiated, and if an agent claims expenses above the cap, the collection account manager typically needs the approval from the producer. So it is there to basically protect, well, not only the producer's position, but also the sales agent.
Right.
Because also up to the cap, there's no discussion, right? So it's just payable to the sales agent. It's seen as basically customary cost in connection with selling the film. But at the same time, it cannot claim, for example, $2 million of marketing expenses in Cannes.
Right.
It's impossible because the producer would obviously never approve it, and we all know that it would be nonsense.
Now, what is the craziest creative accounting story you've ever heard of?
The craziest creative,
because I've heard of a couple. I mean, but like you dealing with all of these distributors, where you go and you look at the numbers and you just go, "Oh, come on, guys, come on."
Crazy accounting stories. I think the typical things whereby you could argue, question, whether or not if we're talking about the distributor in the US, the local distributor, straight distribution, whether those monies, if it's really what they're reporting, if that's really the revenues left after they recoup their expenses and P&A. On the international side, it's not so much on the accounting side. I'm trying to remember. I've seen what I have seen is people just faking agreements and falsifying letters of direction. So, for example, there's in the collection agreement we agree that there's an amount payable to the producer, let's say $250,000. And I remember a couple of films we received from the sales agent actually. Won't mention the name.
Of course,
we don't work with them anymore.
Sure.
But just amendments saying this was signed by this producer's signature, my signature. Just please sign.
Literally falsified.
Literally, and saying the $250,000 payable to production company is now payable to me. For whatever reason.
Yeah.
And, we got a couple of these amendments for a couple of films, and obviously the first thing that we do, and that's the power of being in control of the revenues. Obviously check. This comes from a sales agent, which has got a questionable reputation anyway. We're going to just go. First of all, always check with the producer. Sales agent can forward a signature, but it doesn't say anything. And we figured out that it was just a complete scam. And
there's a lot of there's a lot of that stuff that goes on in especially in distribution, and I've heard just horror stories where I just heard a horror story the other day that there was a film where a distributor was about to make a deal with Miramax. This is back in the 90s, which obviously in the 90s Miramax was at the top of their powers, and another distributor took the film and said, "Hey, I'm going to sell it," and they sold it overseas at like Cannes without their permission. And by the time it was already too late, they'd already sold the movie, and they lost the deal with Miramax, lost millions of dollars.
And if the thing is, once there's a collection account in place, the number of incidents of these kind of things happening is actually rare, because people know that there's a collection account manager.
Babysitting,
exactly. So they know, they don't want to mess up with the reputation. They know that everything is being watched and monitored, so it doesn't happen that often. Now, without a collection account, and obviously I've got these conversations very often when people get interested in collection account management. The stories I hear from independent producers, the way that they're just being screwed is tremendous. I mean, indeed, stories about agents selling their film. They don't know anything about if the film was actually sold, if the rights were licensed, and indeed I've heard stories, people ending up with the film being licensed twice just because they never received the information from the agent who on their behalf already had licensed the film in a certain territory, but never informed the producers. And once the agent got kicked off, the producer started to do, to distribute the film themselves, and they ended up basically licensing the film twice. And it could end up with first of all, the film will never ever be properly distributed, so you lose basically everything, the opportunity to show the film.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
But also obviously financially, and it can then end up in a big mess. And one of the things that you actually try to avoid with having collection account management in place is precisely this, because it doesn't, having a babysitter, Alex, doesn't prevent the kids of dancing on the table. If you really have really naughty kids, of course,
Yes,
But I tend to say, people who want to scam, they will always do. But the thing is, with a collection account in place, you probably figure it out at a very early stage. Right. And you also, having a company that's been in business for more than 20 years and does so many films and it's involved in so many aspects of the film business, nobody wants to mess up with the reputation. So it's a lot less likely, and if it happens, you usually figure it out pretty soon.
Right, exactly. So you'll catch them on the table quicker than if there was nobody there. They'll be dancing on that table for hours.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Now, is there any tips you can give on how filmmakers should, or things that filmmakers should look out for when dealing with a distributor? Like things that are like red flags? Yeah.
Well, I would first of all always, we should speak about sales agent and distributor. So when filmmakers deal with sales agents who sell their films internationally, they should definitely make sure that the agent has a proper reputation, that, for example, the agent works with collection accounts, right? And it's something the producer can actually enforce in a sales agent agreement just by adding a line. We will contract a independent, neutral third party who will take care of receiving, allocating the revenues. I think, at least from our perspective, Alex, that's fair. That's something we always recommend filmmakers to do.
Is that more specifically for international, but also it works as well for domestic?
It depends. It depends how the film is being distributed. It could also be domestic. Now, if it's done domestic, it could be done through a sales agent. Sometimes it's through one of the agencies. I would also basically the same would go for the agencies, right? So it's just to make sure that the monies are, that the whole payment of the revenues of the MG or the royalties are done through a collection account. That's important. Now, I would always say check the distributors, check their reputation, check to the extent possible, their payment behavior. That's extremely important. And maybe going back to mistakes people make, the problem very often is, Alex, that it's very difficult to get a film made. It's very difficult to get a film financed. It's very difficult to get a film distributed. So once people are in that process and it all starts to happen, obviously they're excited. And it's also, I think, part of human nature, once we start to work together with people and everything is beautiful and everything's fantastic, that you don't want to think about what could possibly go wrong.
Of course.
And that's a human thing, but we have to. So even if producers are offered a deal by a distributor, negotiating an interesting deal, I think they should always look, first of all, if it makes sense for their film, creatively, of course, but also financially and business-wise, so that they get a good deal. So whether the straight distribution makes sense or not, or if the minimum guarantee actually makes sense. And I think in a general thing, dealing with distributors and doing the deals, looking if the money's, if there's enough being generated to at least pay back, their investors. So basically, with all the deals in mind, are the deals that I'm closing and I'm aware that it's not always, you cannot always control it, but to the largest extent possible, with all the commitments I have, am I closing the right deals?
Right. Okay. Now, then, can you tell me? Tell me what your company, or where the benefit of working with a company like yours is for filmmakers, even on a smaller scale, as opposed to a bigger independent film. And do you have a minimum? Do you work with certain filmmakers, certain budget ranges, or do you work with all ranges?
So to answer the last question, we work with everybody, and there's no minimum. So we have done, just to give a couple of examples, we've done the Terminator films, Paranormal Activity, also Hacksaw Ridge recently, Spotlight, Secret in Their Eyes, which are all pretty big independent films or very successful.
Are they independent films?
Many of them are, in a way,
independently financed and then picked up.
Independently financed, although they may be through production companies, but they are independently financed and produced and distributed. Now, but we also at the same time, we do small documentaries. We do a lot of foreign films, many films in Spain, Latin America. So there's no real minimum. It makes a difference in the price, without going too much in detail. And I guess it goes for all collection account managers because it's all based on revenue. So typically a collection account manager takes a percentage. Now, if it's a big project and a lot of revenues are expected, the fees can be very competitive. If it's a small thing, at the end of the day, it's all private. It's all private business. So people have to make money. The fees are generally a little bit higher. Now, it always makes sense to have a collection account in place, Alex. And I don't only say this with my head of representative of Fintage House. But even if people have to pay a relatively high fee to have a collection account in place, at the very least, they know that the revenues that are received are being properly paid out. And again, 9 out of 10 cases where there are many parties involved, that doesn't happen. So in terms of benefits, the guarantee that the monies received are properly paid out to the beneficiaries of the film. So everybody gets his or her share of the revenues. That's probably the biggest benefit. But also another thing is basically see a collection account management company as an outsource opportunity, because it's not only receiving all those revenues, paying them out properly, it's also producing payment notifications, right? Every single payment received, payment notification to all beneficiaries, statements being issued maybe once a month, or maybe a film generates revenues for 3 or 4 years, substantial revenues. So maybe on a film there are 20 or 30 statements. But also, and I don't think I mentioned that before, but the collection account manager also typically collects all relevant information, financially relevant information on the film from the sales agent. So distribution agreements, sales reports, etc., just to make a central point in which all the administration is put together. So all that work is a lot of work. And imagine an independent producer taking care of all this. So it's also outsourcing. Now, another benefit is avoidance of conflicts, just by entering into a multi-party agreement with all the parties with a financial interest in the film, and everybody signing off in the collection account management agreement on the fact that the collection agreement supersedes all the single deal terms, at least with respect to revenues.
Sure.
It means that you just avoid conflicts.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess these are the main benefits. Maybe just quickly also creating transparency. Just the fact that everything is shown in the open. The deals done with distributors, where the rights are, for how long, for how many years, in which territories.
You do a massive amount of work in the back end.
Yeah.
Massive amount. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you mind me asking what the ranges are as far as the percentages are?
Sure. So typically, it's typically 1% or or less. Now I have to be careful because and I think all players, so all collection account management, and by the way, there aren't a lot, but I know we all do the same thing. So we look at the film. We always want to know what's the size of the film and what's the complexity. So size, how many revenues can be expected, basically. And complexity, are we paying 2 parties or 100 parties?
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
For example, and based on that, we quote. So every project is different, but on average, I would say it starts at 1%, and then it can go down with a sliding scale. And depending on the film, again, if it's a big film, that should be more than sufficient. If it's a small film or documentary, generally there's a setup fee charged. Just to give you very quickly examples, if a film expects whatever $100 million in revenues, well, the fees can be very, that's not a problem, no discussion. Now, if it's a small thing, and we have done documentaries where for 4 or 5 years for $1,000. So
can you say that? Can you say that again? You just broke up a little bit.
Oh, so if there's a documentary that generates or expects $100,000, well, if it was only 1%, it would be $1,000, and you cannot manage a film, the revenues and administration for 4 or 5 years for $1,000. That's impossible. So then we have to charge a setup fee, and again, that can be between $2,000 and $10,000, completely again depending on the size of the film. But again, even if you have to pay a setup fee and the revenues are indeed $100,000, you know that at least those $100,000 are properly received and properly paid out. The risk is, and that risk is very real, that if you don't have a collection account in place, you should think, well, we save the fees. It doesn't make sense. That there's a real risk that you don't see a penny, that there's nothing received at all.
Right.
So
especially
it's a loss of. Yeah.
And when it also is, especially at that budget range, when you're talking about $100,000, the chances of you actually getting money back out of that $100,000 of revenue, depending on the kind of deals you've got set up with your sales agent and or distributor, it could be challenging. I've seen it. No question.
Yeah, and we say, well, maybe you have to pay whatever, just for the sake of the discussion, $7,500 in collection fees. People say, well, I'm $100,000. It's already 7.5% for the collection account manager. Yeah, we say, well, that it's 92.5% for the rest, rather than zero. So, of course, I'm not saying that if there's no collection account in place,
sure, of course
then immediately it means that there are no revenues.
No, of course
but
not.
The reality of the industry is that it's pretty challenging.
So it all depends on the project, and then again, everything's negotiable. Once
of course,
once we get in.
Within certain ranges, but of course, everything depends on again size, complexity, and maybe also volume, but also for Fintage at least, and I guess where everybody's pretty similar in this in this industry. So all other collection account managers would do the same. At the end of the day, we want to work with all the filmmakers. So you don't want to put a burden. We always try to find a way to work together because you want this service to be available for everybody. That's one thing. That's and then on the other hand, a producer makes a small short film or documentary today. Maybe tomorrow makes the next big thing around. So we always try to make it work.
Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests, so it's going to be kind of rapid fire. Can you tell me a book that had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Oh, that's a challenging one, Alex. I think personal life and career, it all comes pretty much together. For me, which has been a very important book, is actually it's called Viaja Islam, which is from Carlos Castañeda.
Oh,
and
yes.
It's about this. I don't know if you know the book.
Oh, I know Carlos without question.
It's Latin American literature, and it's about a shaman who, if I remember well, that basically shows this very successful businessman from the US. I don't remember which city, somewhere in the desert between the US and Mexico, what the real essence of life is. So nature, being close to nature. And one of the things I always remember, which I take basically with me every day almost, the fact that there's a story about the death, the death following us as a shadow wherever we go. So if you look quickly, you can see him. And basically, it shows you that every day could be your last day. And I think if you live like that, maybe for some people it would be depressing. But I think it makes you appreciate everything in life every day. So for me, it's been a very important book in my profession, but in a broader sense, in my entire life.
Now, the name of the book was Journey.
Journey to Islam.
Yes,
Journey
Islam.
to Islam. Yeah, Carlos Castaneda.
Yeah, and he also wrote his famous book is The Teachings of Don Juan.
Yeah, yes, Las Enseñanzas de Don Juan. Yeah, the teaching of Don Juan. Yeah,
which I've read. Yeah, that's an insane book. All his books are amazing, but fantastic books. Now, what lesson took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
Oh,
I know these are big.
These are really complicated questions.
Deep.
Maybe if I look at my life, the lesson took you the longest. Maybe the lesson that life is short and that you have to do whatever you want to do. You have to do it today. And maybe from a personal note, I love Latin America. I love Mexico, where I live nowadays. But it took me a very long time to realize that this is my my journey, my path in life. And if you're from a very developed, it's maybe not a good word to say because developed again is for everybody different. But let's say a very easygoing country like Holland, and you've got everything, and then moving to a more difficult country like Mexico, that's a big decision. But I realized that you just only live once in life. You've got people say, I wait until I'm 65 and then I retire. Or people say, I'm just going to finish my job and I do my career. And once I have enough experience, I'm going to do this. My lesson would be also what I would tell people, just do it today. You only live once. But it took me too long to realize. But I'm happy that I took the decision and that I realized still on time.
Yes, exactly. And we're at the end of the day, we're only in a race with ourselves.
I guess so. Yeah.
Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Favorite films of all time. I mean, it depends on
today.
Yeah, that's because of the whole It thing. I watched the original It film again. I have to say, although it's looking back at now as an adult, dated, but I still like it very much. Sixth Sense was actually one of the best things I think, best films ever. And then I really like the more like the Spanish films or Latin American films. There are so many great films. Probably I would say it is the Secret in Their Eyes, but the original one. So Secreto de sus Ojos, I think it was great, Argentinian film. I think they even won Best Foreign Film a couple of years back. Fantastic. And also because it shows so much about Latin American society, about Argentina in particular. All those films where you really, can really feel what people are actually culturally doing. For me, that's amazing. There are many other films, but
those are the 3.
Latin American, but these are the 3. Yeah.
And then, where can people find you and learn more about your service?
Where they can find me, I would say they can all come over to Quintana Roo, Mexico. Of course, everybody's welcome to Cancun.
Don't give your home address out or home number. Just more online. Where they can find you?
Yeah, well, they can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest. And otherwise, they can go to the Fintage House webpage. But I guess if they type me in LinkedIn, there are not so many David Zannonis in this world. So
Okay.
people should be able to find me.
David, thank you so much for taking the time out to educate the tribe about this aspect of the film business that I've never really gone deep into, and I'm glad that we had you as a resource to explain it all to us. So thanks again, David.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Alex. It was a pleasure, and I hope it's useful for the community, for the tribe.
Thank you, my friend.
Take care.
Many knowledge bombs were dropped in this episode. Thank you, David, so much for jumping on the podcast and sharing all your knowledge and wisdom with the tribe. I know I learned a lot. Honestly, this was an area of the film industry that I just really didn't know anything about. I heard a little bit here and there, but nothing as detailed as what was laid out in this episode. And I know a lot of you are micro budget filmmakers, low budget filmmakers that like, well, I don't have to worry about that, Alex. My budget's $15,000, $20,000. Yeah, I get it, but at least you get a little understanding of what to do once you get bigger budgets. And I know for a fact that a lot of people listening, a lot of people in the tribe are working on $100, $200, $500 million, $2 million movies as well. So this is something you should really look into and understand very carefully moving forward, because it can definitely be a pitfall for filmmakers if they're not aware of what to do and how to do it. And, in all honesty, too, being involved with so many projects over the years, having a middleman or a middle person who handles all the money and is not emotional about it, God, that's a really good thing to do, because filmmakers, creatives, producers, directors, egos, everything gets out of hand sometimes. And it's always good to have someone with a no side, Switzerland, if you will, someone right in the middle who's not going to take any sides and just do what was contractually set up to do in the first place. So definitely check it out, guys. And if you want to reach out to David or Fintage House or anything we talked about in this episode, head over to indiefilmhustle.com/228 for the show notes, where I'll leave all his contact information. And don't forget, we are launching Suzanne Lyon's Indie Film Producing Masterclass on April 9th. And if you want to get in early and get a special early bird discount and get access to the course a little earlier than everybody else, just email me at ifhsubmissions@gmail.com and let me know that you want me to put on the list, and I will put you on the list. The list is starting to get fairly big because a lot of people want to get in this. And I'm telling you, this course is insane. It's about 5-6 hours. It was normally a $2,000 to $2,500 course or workshop that she gave, and we put it on film and put it on an online course for everybody in the world that could not get to her workshops to have access to this insane knowledge, as well as any kind of paperwork you might need to raise money, to make a movie, contracts, agreements, all included in this course. So definitely check it out. And I have a slight little bit of big news coming up in the next few episodes. I will be announcing it soon. Has nothing to do with Ego and Desire, though I can't wait to hopefully give you some great news about Ego and Desire soon. But this is about something else. We're going to be doing something else very cool at Indie Film Hustle, and it's a pretty big deal. So I can't wait to share that with you. So I'm getting close to launching, getting close to finishing it up. I've been working quietly and hard in the lab, getting it all ready for you guys. So thanks for listening, guys. And as always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.